Hi, everyone. Welcome back, and welcome to the second week of Shaketember, where we will be discussing the Tempest tonight. And yes, hold up. This is like very uninspiring. Everyone else's is so much better. But I am joined by Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Lukash from A Cool Reader's Thesis. And so let's see. I guess we can start by just saying, like, is this our first time reading it? I know the answer to this already, but and general thoughts on it. So, Jason, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So this is my favorite Shakespeare play, which I think I mentioned last week in the Othello discussion. I was going to go through my book journal and see how many times I've actually read it, but I didn't. I think this was my seventh time reading it, and I just love it so much. I love this play so much, and when I encounter people who I don't know, who just don't love it or don't seem to get it or seem to think it's just kind of odd or something. I don't know. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, I suppose, but on some level, I think, oh, that person couldn't possibly be close friends with me, right? Not because I wouldn't want to be, but because our brains and our hearts clearly work in different ways. When I think about how I feel about this play, and when I think about somebody thinking that the play is just kind of strange or a curio, which is not to set you two up to say that you love it. If you think it's a strange little curio, that's fine. We can still be friends. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a really kind of precious play to me, I suppose. But yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of diving into it a little bit more tonight.
Yeah. Lukash.
And yeah, so this is only my second time reading it. I actually read it for the first time in the first year of Shaketube. That was my first time reading it. And after reading it, I watched a movie with Richard Burton as Prospero. And so this was only my second time reading it. And the first time reading it, I liked it. I enjoyed it. In fact, I made a video about it because I did it for Shaketube, which I haven't rewatched. But anyway, I liked it, but I didn't love it. Like when I found out that it was like Jason's favorite play, I was like, all right, that's an interesting favorite, but whatever. But I think I think the same thing when people say that A Midsummer Night's Dream is their favorite. I'm just like, what? Why? But anyway, so I liked it, but I wasn't like over the moon. But like there was great poetry clearly and so on, and I kind of did like the heart behind it, the themes behind it. This time around, I really loved it. It almost blew my mind, I guess. I don't know. That might be going a bit far, but it just I don't know. It was like the second time reading it. It was like all this stuff just exploded from it, and I really loved it this time. Not just for the little bits of poetry that are and the songs that are in it, but just the interesting characters and the themes of it. And I think it's a Shakespeare play with a lot of heart. I think that contrasted very nicely with our play last week, which was kind of, to my mind, one of Shakespeare's most heartless plays. And so I really loved it this time around. So that's my opening statement.
The opening salvo.
Yeah. And for me, this is I think it's my second time reading it. Like pretty much all the plays, I feel like I mostly read them in college for my Shakespeare class that I was in. And I believe in college, my professor said this was his favorite Shakespeare play. And the second time I saw a production of the play was when that professor, who is the chair of the English department, and he was one of the drama professors, directors, he played Prospero
that's cool.
As his retirement. It was like a special performance for he was going to be retiring, and he sent out special invitations to everybody who had been involved in his theater in the last, like, well, probably that he could remember, you know. But it just went out, like the school basically sent out invites to his retirement performance. And that just makes it that much more special to me too, because like all of my friends that I was in the theater department with were all sitting together when Prospero gives his final speech about, you know, us letting him go with our applause, and we're just all crying and being very theater geek-esque.
That's really cool.
So like even today, whenever I read that last scene, I got a little choked up. And then the first time I saw the play was, I think it was the first show that one of the community theaters that started in my town. It was the first show that they put on, and I don't think I'd ever really. I mean, we read it in college, but I didn't remember a lot of it, and just the way they staged it and everything just blew my mind so much for a community theater production. And I was just like, and I was sitting there with one of my friends who was a chemistry teacher and he liked theater, but he didn't understand Shakespeare and everything. So I'm just sitting there with like my mouth open the whole time. And every once in a while he'd be like, what's going on? So I'd have
what did they do that was so wild, Rainey?
Well, I think just for a theater performance, just the staging of it was really like the opening scene with the Tempest. They had a big ship in the middle, like the front of a ship. So then just with the lighting and, you know, the fog machines and the thunder and lightning, lighting effects and sound effects. And it was just, for my small little town and this new theater that was coming in, it was just like, how did they do that? Like they're new. How did they figure this out? You know, how'd they have the money for this?
Yeah.
So it just and then they had a woman playing, or well, she was a teenager at the time, playing Ariel, and she's one of the girls in our town that like everybody knows because she has a beautiful voice and she's, you know, all over the place in our town. So she just did a really beautiful job playing Ariel, and just made it like that much more poignant to her portrayal of Ariel and how she related to Prospero. I can't even remember who played Prospero in that version though, actually. So, but yeah, so those two performances of the play really did solidify it as one of my favorite plays too. Midsummer is still my favorite, but
oh, I didn't know that Midsummer was your favorite. I didn't say that at the time because
yeah. So both Jason and I have plays that Lukash is just like, I don't know why they love it so much.
Oh, well, no, but now I'm more understanding the Tempest. I need to reread A Midsummer Night's Dream, but anyway. Yeah.
So it's funny, Rainey, that you bring up Midsummer Night's Dream is your favorite play, and this is my favorite play. So I often think of those two plays together, right? Not in the same way that I think of the Tempest with Titus Andronicus. I pair those plays in my mind always together. I've taught them together, et cetera, et cetera. But I have long, and I may have said this in a video in the past, I didn't rewatch my Tempest video from a couple years ago before this, so if I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. But but I have often thought that Shakespeare taught in high school is taught wrong, right? That they come at the curriculum wrong somehow, right? So I get Romeo and Juliet in ninth grade, right? That's what we read in ninth grade. That's what almost all high school students in Wyoming read in ninth grade is Romeo and Juliet. That makes sense. It's about teenagers and love and hormones and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then in 10th grade in Wyoming, we read Julius Caesar. And it makes no sense to me. I mean, yes, it's a great play. I'm not saying it's not a great play. but it's a play about, old dead politicians. And when you're 15 years old, 16 years old, that's the last thing in the world you want to be reading about, And so when we think about the fact that so many high school students are turned off to Shakespeare, I just wonder how many high school students would be turned on to Shakespeare if, as 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, instead of reading about old dead politicians, they're reading about a wizard and his daughter and revenge and, spirits, or in Midsummer Night's Dream, right? A man turning into an ass and the Queen of the Fairies. I just think if it were done well, I think teaching those two plays in high school would have, so many more students falling in love with Shakespeare than do in high school, because it really seems like most don't. And I don't think it needs to be that way.
Yeah.
We read, actually, in my high school, we read Romeo and Juliet, and then we read Macbeth, which
we read Macbeth as seniors. Yeah.
For me and for a lot of the boys, that was like so cool. It was like, this guy's just gonna murder the king, It was, like, I remember the English teacher being like, "Oh yeah, Romeo and Juliet was sort of maybe a girl's play, but Macbeth is kind of a sausage fest." Anyway,
a sausage fest.
The girls would like it too, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail your point, but
no. Well, so that's essentially my point. I think that when the language is difficult, and there are people who will say, "Oh no, it's really not that difficult." It is difficult. I've read this 7 times, and there are passages that are still challenging for me. Mm-hmm. I think when the language is tough, and I don't know, when it just feels alien, like you have to, as educators, I think you have to latch on to the things, even if there's surface things, right? Like, oh, there's a wizard. Oh, there's a monster. Oh, there's a spirit. You have to latch on to the things that students at that age are going to be struck by, right? Find themselves a little bit awed by. Or in the case of Midsummer Night's Dream, the things that they're going to laugh at, right? Like all of the stuff in that play with Bottom is hilarious. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you have to do is teach. So the people who come up with the curriculum, I just don't really, I've never really understood it. It just seems like a no-brainer that The Tempest and Midsummer should be taught in high school. But they're not very often at all, from what I understand, anywhere.
And what I think, so like, actually, one of the things I was thinking about while I read The Tempest this time was about my 12th grade AP English class, where the teacher, who was still my favorite teacher from high school, whenever we read a play, not just Shakespeare, but whenever we read any play, she would have us act out scenes in class. Like, it wasn't the best acting, obviously, but she would have us go up into the front of the class and, sort of act out the play. And I was reading this and I was thinking, this would have been so much fun for a bunch of seniors in high school to try to act, especially the scenes with Caliban and Stefano and Trinculo. Those scenes are hysterical. I love those scenes. Those would have been so funny to see, a bunch of teenagers trying to act that out, or and some of the other things that go on. It would have been a lot of fun to do with The Tempest. So
yeah, that's a good point, because I feel like I sort of understand maybe why educators think that you need to talk about Julius Caesar, and maybe that would be the way to do it for the history part of it. But especially with the, from when I was maybe a senior on, when the wizard type thing and the fantasy thing really took the world by storm, basically, you'd think at that point educators would be like, well, if we want to teach Shakespeare, wizards are probably the way to go.
The wizards are in.
Yeah, wizards are in. Let's bring Shakespeare back.
And let's Prospero up like Gandalf or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, really, absolutely.
Kind of a weird Gandalf-y type of figure, kind of being able to manipulate things the way, Gandalf is a lot more like, you do it your way and then I'll bring you back. But
well, Gandalf, I think, smokes more pipe weed, maybe than Frodo as well. although doesn't in the films anyway, doesn't Saruman have that line like you've grown too fond of the halfling's leaf or something like that?
Oh,
Just dulled your mind or your senses or something.
Oh yeah, okay. That is sorry. I thought that was in one of the Hobbit movies, but I think that's in Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
Yeah, I've never seen the Hobbit movies. Yeah.
I haven't either, actually. But that's a tangent. I was gonna
No, actually, speaking of the Hobbit, sorry, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but the scene where Ariel imitates Trinculo and confuses everyone reminded me of the scene in The Hobbit where the three trolls, are about to cook all the dwarves, and then Gandalf sort of is hiding and he imitates one of the troll or talks like one of the trolls to get them all fighting among each other and confused. And then, and then the sun comes out and they all turn to stone and then they're free. So
one has to wonder: did Tolkien maybe have the Tempest in mind? Right? I mean, have that scene in mind because it does feel very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and they kind of even going back to A Midsummer Night's Dream, they kind of have that whenever the four of them are in the forest and they kind of get blinded by Puck. And he's like calling out to each one of them to like all mixed up and get them lost and get to their next partner or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of that going on in Shakespeare. And so
misdirection.
I mean, it could be just, I mean, Shakespeare's one of those authors who's had such an influence that people are influenced by him without realizing that they're influenced by him. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So Tolkien may not have had may not have been thinking, oh yeah, like that scene in The Tempest when he wrote the scene with the troll, but it may be a legacy that influenced him without him necessarily thinking about it. Even though I'm sure that Tolkien like knew Shakespeare.
Maybe it was like osmosis or something, right? I mean, it's just there. It's just it's in the not necessarily the vernacular, but the
DNA.
It's kind of like in the bedrock of your mind, maybe, as a writer. So one thing that I'm curious about, really, really curious about. And I know, Rainey, this is your discussion, so I apologize for kind of taking the reins real quick here. But I'm really, really curious to know what each of your favorite scene is in this, and then also what is your favorite kind of bit of dialogue or your favorite speech? Because it's not the same for me. I have my favorite scene, and then I have my favorite speech. And my favorite speech in this is actually my favorite speech from all of Shakespeare. And then my favorite scene is just, oh my God, I love it so much. So I'm really curious to know what your favorites are.
Well, I already kind of said what my favorite speech is because it's the last speech that Prospero gives. And actually, I didn't really think about this till now, but I actually like that last scene where he is setting Ariel free. And it's kind of the culmination of everything that's been happening. He kind of went from the revenge of, I need to like ruin these guys' lives because they ruined my life. And like kind of keeping all the spirits on the island captive. And then Ariel comes in and says, basically, if you would see how these people are suffering, you would feel empathy. And I would, I do, and I'm not even human, or, that kind of thing. And that kind of changes Prospero to where he's like, he suddenly kind of learns to forgive and is like, well, I mean, maybe that's not the last scene. I can't really, I'm getting my stuff in, but out of order. But yeah, he sets her, or him, I guess it's ambiguous, but I just have always seen it as a woman, sets her free. And it's kind of like her kind of leading him into the world of forgiveness, and where he has had all this power beforehand. And now he's like, I have the power to set these people free and set my mind at ease by forgiving them and just leading my life and getting rid of the magic and just being who I was before. Yeah. So yeah, I just kind of feel like that's it's a really like powerful ending, I guess, to me.
So that scene really, so that's not my favorite scene, but that scene really struck me this time because I tend to always think of this as a play about forgiveness, a play in which Prospero forgives. And that scene struck me, and maybe I've thought of this before when I've read the play, I don't know, I can't remember. But this time around, that scene struck me very much so in a different light. It struck me as Prospero essentially kind of admitting that he doesn't have all the answers, right? Mm-hmm. That he's honest with himself about that. And, and the fact that he is humble enough to admit that to himself and to allow change or transformation in himself. That struck me as the really beautiful thing about it. Not so much that he decides to forgive, but the fact that he allowed that decision to be possible in himself for the first time. And I just find it kind of extraordinary. And there are other moments in the play too that I thought of along those lines, right? So I mean, we think of Prospero as being somebody he's like, he's large and in charge, I mean, he's the man pulling all the strings. But at the same time, I mean, there are moments in the play where he gets distracted, where he's just like, oh shit, they're gonna come and kill me. Those guys are gonna come kill me. I totally forgot about the murder plot. So I'm gonna cut this short. And and so reading it this time, I was really just struck by how human he seems to me as a character. Because I think Shakespeare on some level wants him to seem larger than life, but he also has these moments in the play where Shakespeare just makes him seem really, really vulnerable and really just really open to suggestion, which is kind of a powerful thing, right? I mean, when you have a character who is the one who's literally controlling everything, and to make that character be somebody who is open to suggestion and open to having their course completely redirected by somebody that they've been controlling, I think is really kind of mysterious and beautiful. So.
Okay, Lukash.
So I guess my scene is actually the same scene that Rainey just talked about. So, but because Rainey just talked about it, I will talk about a different scene that I also really loved. And the scene that I loved was when Stefano, I think, finds Trinculo and Caliban like lying under whatever something together. I want
the Gabardine.
What?
The Gabardine, I think it is. They call it the Gabardine.
I was going to say a tarp, but I'm like, they didn't have tarps.
That's not a terribly poetic word.
No. So when he finds them, and that whole scene afterward where they like introduce Caliban to alcohol, and he's just like, surely you've dropped from heaven, as he's like getting drunk. I just thought that was so funny. And what I thought was also really interesting about that scene on a referential level was that it actually reminded me of the very last chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, actually, when St. Paul, funnily enough, finds himself in a tempest at sea and is crash landed like he's in Star Wars or something. Anyway, he washes ashore on this island. He doesn't know what island it is. It turns out to be Malta, and he and his crew are stranded there. And then they're sitting around a fire with the natives, and St. Paul gets bitten by a snake, but nothing happens to him. Just like Steve Donahue. Anyway. but nothing happens to him. So all the people think that he's a god. And so the people of this island think that he's a god. And this scene seemed like this comical just inversion of that, where it's just like, oh, instead of getting bitten by a snake and surviving, they're gonna just get him drunk, and they're these two drunken jesters or whatever they're supposed to be, and Caliban is this I don't know whatever he is, and I thought it was interesting on a referential level. And the weird thing about the chapter from Acts is that St. Paul doesn't correct the people of Malta. He didn't say, oh, no, I'm not God. You should worship, the one God or Jesus or whatever. He just kind of gets supplies and leaves. And I'm just like, wow, St. Paul just let the people of Malta think that he's a God. Anyway, but so I thought that I thought the scene was funny, and also on this wider referential level, I thought was really interesting. And I have no clue whether it was deliberate or whether it's just me reading something into it. But I mean, again, Shakespeare certainly knew his Bible. So I don't know, but yeah, so I'll put that as my favorite scene, just since Rainey just talked about what is actually my favorite scene.
Yeah. I like that scene too. I was actually debating between those two scenes, because I just think that for me, it was just a hysterical scene, just to watch Caliban get increasingly drunk and just be like, you guys are awesome, man.
That scene made me think about the different ways, God, there are so many different ways that you could portray Caliban.
Mm-hmm.
More ways certainly in film than on stage. But they describe him as, he's mistaken as a fish, right? So gosh, with your use of the word tarp, it could rhyme with carp. But so that was another thing I was thinking a lot about while reading this time around was if I were directing this, what would I do in terms of costuming, in terms of makeup, to turn Caliban into a monster? Or conversely, if you're directing a play, it might be interesting actually to make Caliban seem and look like everyone else, and have it be just the suggestion of there being something in his soul, especially with all the talk. And I know I've talked about this in videos in the past, especially with all the kind of talk about nature and nurture in this play, which I just find so fascinating. But yeah.
Yeah, and he has been played in a lot of different ways. It's my understanding. Because there's everyone talks about him like he's this weird monster, and we're told that he's the son of this witch, but a lot of the stuff that we know about him that is I want to say fishy, but that is bad is hearsay, basically. We're the only testimony we have about Sycorax, his mother, is from Prospero, and maybe Caliban mentions her, and who knows if Prospero is telling the truth about her. Even when we're told that he tried to rape Miranda, again, it's all hearsay. I don't want to open the he said she said can of worms, but it is all hearsay.
Well, he does seem to kind of confirm it, though. He does say, "Oh, I wish I had gotten away with it." Right? I had peopled the Isle.
That's true. But because a lot of what we know about him and about Sycorax, because a lot of it is hearsay. It would be easy to play it differently, because there's no necessary reason for us to take Prospero completely at his word. So yeah. Anyway.
Whenever and it's funny because I've seen the play twice, and different versions, different things about them, stick out in my mind. And the one that I saw when my professor retired, I can't really remember how anybody else was portrayed in that one, except for my professor, I guess that was just because that's who I was there to see, and I didn't know anybody else because everybody else was a college student at that point, and I was an old lady at that point. And but then when I saw it at my community theater, a lot of them were people that I knew, so it sticks out in my mind how they portrayed the characters. And that Caliban character that they portrayed in that one, they did dress him in like a greenish kind of almost camouflage type bodysuit. And I think he even had like a cap with like fins on the head, like he would have been a fish. So they took it pretty literally at that point and kind of made him kind of amphibian like. But I honestly cannot remember how he was portrayed in the other one, which kind of makes me think that maybe they portrayed him more in like a human way. But yeah, I can't remember that one. I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can find some pictures.
Have either of you guys seen the old Clash of the Titans from the early '80s, directed by I think Desmond Davis directed that?
No, I don't think I have.
So that was I don't know if that was the last film where Ray Harryhausen did the kind of stop motion effects that he was famous for. But yeah, sometimes, not always, but sometimes when I read The Tempest, I think of Caliban as Calabas from Clash of the Titans, right? So he's got like these horns and he's got this fucking tail and it's, just, I mean, he's just kind of just nasty and snarly. It looks like a goat or something. And, but the name is just so similar that I sometimes am put in mind of that character from Clash of the Titans.
Yeah. Well, that was probably for good reason, I bet. I've never seen it, but
you guys should totally see that movie, man. The score from that movie, oh my God. The score is so beautiful. That's probably the film score that I find myself humming the most. Just kind of absent-mindedly. I find myself humming the score from Clash of the Titans. So it's a great movie.
Speaking of music, another thing that hit me while reading The Tempest this time was just like how much music is in it, and like I don't know how different productions have handled the music and finding actual, because I'm guessing that people find actual music for them to sing when they're singing a song or whatever. And I don't know why, but while I was reading this play, I was thinking to myself, it would be cool to like do this play and use music from different musical artists, like famous musical artists or composers. Like earlier in the week, I was thinking, well, what if you like use nothing but Mozart pieces, arrangements of Mozart pieces? You know what I mean? Like when Ariel sings "Full Fathom 5, Thy Father Lies," you can find an aria from an opera somewhere and try to find an actor who's a good enough singer that they can at least like sort of halfway sing it, you know what I mean? Or when they're doing that whole pageant, dumb show, whatever, near the end, and there's music, like, I don't know, find something for them to dance to from Mozart. Or I was even thinking like the very first scene, like with the Tempest itself, it might be interesting to like contrast the like people being shipwrecked from this tempest and being, their ship being sunk or whatever, and contrast it with like the overture to The Marriage of Figaro, which is this very like silly sounding, funny little piece of music. And I don't know, but then you could take other artists, like, I don't know. I haven't thought too deeply about who else I would pick. I've just been listening to a lot of Mozart this week. But I thought that would be interesting. Yeah.
So as you were saying that, I was thinking about the opening scene with the shipwreck, and I was thinking about Under Pressure with David Bowie and Freddie Mercury, which could be a lot of fun.
And now we need to like we need to use the show now.
I think we need to get like some Lego sets or something, and maybe make our own kind of version of the Tempest with the soundtrack and everything. I think that would be fabulous. Maybe that'll be for next year.
Because they make a second version of the Lego movie, but it's the Tempest.
Yes, we should do like every video instead of us talking about the play. It should just be us reenacting things somehow.
Oh my gosh. That could be
all have to
something to think about
memorize.
for next year.
All of us just memorize lines. We'll do some scene with 3 people, and we'll just have at it.
It would be kind of fun actually for us to choose a scene, right? So, for instance, the scene with Stefano and Trinculo and Caliban, and the 3 of us to kind of memorize those parts, or even just have them in front of us, but really try to kind of perform it on Zoom a little bit, right? Just with our voices, and see what that. And if it was terrible, we wouldn't have to upload it. We could just keep it a secret. Nobody would ever know that we had done that. But
I think it's terrible to post it, but yeah,
that could be fun.
Yeah.
So my favorite scene in the play, and it's, I'm not 100% sure why I love it so much, but I think that my favorite character in the play is Miranda, and I love how kind of wide-eyed she is, and how she's naive, but there's also something really kind of canny about her as well. And I love the scene where she goes and finds Ferdinand when he's moving the wood, when he's hauling the wood. I love that scene so much. And my favorite part, okay, so we've got Ferdinand, and he's hauling his wood, and he says, "I am in my condition a prince, Miranda. I do think a king I would not so, and would no more endure this wooden slavery than to suffer the flesh fly blow my mouth. Hear my soul speak. The very instant that I saw you, did my heart fly to your service. There resides to make me slave to it, and for your sake am I this patient log man." And I just love that her next line, it's a standalone line, and she just says, "Do you love me?" And it just gives me goosebumps even to think about it, because I think it could be, and Rainey, you're going to totally get this because you're an actress. But when I was in graduate school, that was the first time I've ever acted. Okay. And we did Act 1, Scene 1 of King Lear, and I just had a little part. I played the King of France. But it's the only time in my life that I've ever had to memorize lines. And I had always heard, right? I'd always heard this, that, and the other thing. Oh, there are a lot of ways to play it, blah, blah, blah. And, but even a part that tiny, man, I swear to God, like the weeks I spent learning those lines, there were probably 24 ways that I was delivering certain lines just in a shower to myself, whatever, just practicing them. There were probably 24 ways that changed the meaning of the line. I mean, it was extraordinary to me. I never really understood that. And that line where she says, "Do you love me?" I feel like it's a box that can be opened and can be done in 100 different ways to communicate 100 different things. And I just think it's so beautiful, right? I mean, on the one hand, like I think the most obvious reading is she's listening to Ferdinand kind of wax poetic and this, that, and the other thing. And she's like, maybe her saying, "Do you love me?" is like, what the hell are you saying? Is this what you're saying? Is this what you're driving at? But I think for me, when I read that, I don't know, that line is so much more disarming and so much more vulnerable, for her to ask it of him, the way that, I think it speaks to her putting herself on the line. And I just find it just one of the most kind of exquisite moments in Shakespeare. And Felicity Jones does a great job with it in the Julie Taymor film. I'm a huge Felicity Jones fan. I just love her to pieces, and she's just wonderful in that part. But yeah, I think that line. I mean, it's such a simple line, right? "Do you love me?" But I just think it could be done 100 different ways, and it could just, I don't know, it could just communicate so many different things in the moment. And if I were an actress in that part, I mean, good Lord, that would be fun to figure out how I wanted to say it, and maybe change it up from night to night, Do something different on Wednesdays from what you did on Mondays, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So that's my favorite scene in the play, because I just find it so tender. And, when he answers her and she says, I am a fool to weep at what I am glad of. God almighty, man, it's just beautiful. Her character is just, I don't know, she's lovely, right? She seems so naive and so kind of silly in some ways. But on the other hand, too, she's so moved by what she sees on the ocean. And she's so, she's just so quick to love this young man that she sees. And I love the scene at the end where what are they playing, chess, right? And they have this there's this kind of fun little kind of banter between them, right? You get a sense, even just in a little tiny scene, of how they're going to be as a married couple, which is just, I mean, good Lord, as a writer, to be able to pull that off with so few lines, to give a sense of what the rest of their lives are going to be like, is it's a pretty powerful thing. And so all of this just goes back to the fact that this is my favorite Shakespeare play, and this is why, because I don't know, I feel like he did a lot of really extraordinary, subtle things with this play that I don't necessarily see in a lot of the rest of his work.
It's funny though. It's interesting though. You're talking about like the glimpse of what their marriage will be like, because something that a lot of people point out is that in, I think, pretty much all of Shakespeare's comedies, almost, we don't get to see how the marriages at the end actually work out. And like some of them, you could argue, likely won't work out that well. So it's interesting, and this doesn't end with a marriage because it's not a comedy in the traditional sense, but it's interesting that in this play, this very late play that kind of defies the typical classifications, we do actually see a little bit of what their marriage will be like that. So that's cool.
Yeah. And I think I like that on the surface, like you were saying, Jason, she just has she seems really naive, and she seems just like kind of how we thought of Desdemona, that she's just like the angel of the house, kind of she's just, everything about her is pure, and she has nothing, no like layers to her or anything like that. But I think we can see almost right from the start that she does. She's never seen anybody in the outside world. So in that respect, she is naive, but she just has such wonder for everything that she's experiencing. And, she's almost like a baby growing up, in the span of a few hours, basically, seeing, all these things that she never even knew, which probably knew they existed, but she never really thought about them. And even her trying to convince her father not to be so hard on these people, shows that like she has a little bit of defiance in her. She's not just, I mean, you kind of get the sense that she blindly follows him because like she's the only man she's ever known, basically. But at the same time, she does kind of stand up to him at times, and which you wouldn't really think, because everybody else on the island is kind of controlled by Prospero, and she's the only one that kind of speaks up for the good of other people. So I think it's definitely, she has a lot more layers than some of his female characters.
Well, and the other thing, Rainey, that's really powerful about that scene where she confronts her dad during the storm is she asks him, she says, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the line is, but she says, what essentially, what was it, you that put these wild, waters into Aurora, et cetera, et cetera. And what that communicated to me reading it this time was that she knew enough about her dad to suspect that he would be capable of something that, on the surface, that treacherous, that menacing, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, right, like I don't get the sense that that Miranda is just, looks at her father in this kind of worshipful way. She seems to see him as a complicated figure. She seems to see him as somebody capable of doing something that would hurt her. I mean, she suspects him of having done this thing that is really devastating her inside, right? And God, that scene is just so magnificent too, because so she suspects that there is harm actually being done, and then Prospero assures her, "Oh no, hold, like, cool your jets. There's no harm being done." But then when he talks to Ariel later about having done it, he has to confirm with Ariel. So like nothing bad happened, right? So again, right? I mean, the characters are so complicated, right? They're presenting this version of themselves to the world. Prospero is doing his best to to communicate to his daughter that he would never have hurt these people, but yet he's not sure if he can trust his own power. Right. So he has to confirm with Ariel that nobody's actually been hurt. Because how then do you explain to your daughter, "Oh yeah, I told you everything was fine. Oh, it didn't really go that way." So again, I just, reading it this time, I was like, good Lord, it's really, really subtle. And the characters are really, really complex in ways that aren't obvious on a first reading or second reading, the third reading. It's fascinating because again, it's like my seventh time reading this, and I feel like I saw things in it that I never had seen before, which is kind of cool. It's what you want from art, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why Shakespeare is one of the best, because you don't just have to, like, okay, I read this once, I never am going to read it again. Like, every time you're going to think something differently about a character, or see something you didn't see the first time, or just any version of the play that you see will be done differently, and you'll get a different perspective of how maybe Shakespeare meant the characters to be. So yeah, that's why he's the best.
Yeah. There don't seem to be many other writers whose work contains that much kind of, I don't know, that much depth, or and not just depth of like, oh, this is really profound, et cetera, but I don't know. There don't seem to be a ton of writers out there whose books that you could read again and again and again and again and always get completely new things out of. And I mean, that's just, God, it's not even a talent, right? It's a blessing of some kind that a writer is capable of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I agree with everything you said, but now moving back to the play specifically, I was a little bit confused by something. And what I was confused by was that I remembered, what I had in my memory was that the whole play was just kind of a show that Prospero put on so that he could kind of, I don't know, humble everyone and then just be like, actually, I'm going to forgive you all and everything's okay. But like, I read Marjorie Garber's chapter in her book, Shakespeare After All, and I've listened to what y'all have said. And it sounds like I may have misremembered that like actually he was planning to like take revenge on these people.
Oh yeah.
It was Ariel who talked him out of it. And so I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit confused because I think there's a reason I misremembered that. And I think the reason is because it doesn't seem like Ariel has to do much to convince him. It's like, I feel like the convincing happens in like 2 lines, like the one scene that Rainey talked about. It was like 2 lines and suddenly Prospero was like, yes, I will forgive everyone, And I guess that's probably why I remembered it that way, as just Prospero putting on a show and him never actually wanted to take revenge, because there's so little like that has to be done to get him to not take revenge.
So speaking to that, Lukash, one thing, I love these conversations with you guys. Let me just say, so one thing I thought when I read it this time was when Ariel and Prospero are talking to each other, about this, and Ariel manages to kind of convince him. There is, where the hell is it? Ariel says something like, mine would, right? My emotions would be, appealed to or whatever, were I human. Mm-hmm. And then Prospero says something like, and so shall mine be, or something. I don't remember exactly what he says. But what struck me, so I was thinking the same thing. It was like, okay, that's a pretty quick pivot. But I was thinking like, okay, what if the actor playing Prospero, how long a beat is there between Ariel saying what he says and Prospero saying what he says, right? I mean, how long a beat is it, right? Is it 1 second? Is it 10 seconds? So it seems to me the longer the pause in the production or the performance of the play, the more compelling and convincing and mysterious it could be. It seems like that's a moment where Shakespeare is kind of putting it in the hands of the actor, saying, okay, you're going to change here, but I want you to think about how you're going to perform this so that the change seems convincing. And I never really thought about that before reading it this time.
Yeah.
I think the length of pause right there that the actor playing Prospero decides to take is really what's going to sell it, I suppose.
Yeah. And going along with that, I was, again, thinking back to the one performance that I saw, and the way my professor and the person who played Ariel did that final scene, the reaction, the facial expression, the pause, and the closeness of the two characters, that was what did it, because it was almost like you saw the student becoming the teacher, like and that's speaking to like that he humbled himself. Excuse me. Ariel would set her piece or his piece about that, and it was like she was imploring him to be more human and to be more empathetic, and saying like, if you, excuse me, I have to take a little sip. The last of my wine. Oh gosh. So if you would just like, I am not human and I feel these things. You are human. Why don't you feel that way? You are the one who basically gave me life, as it were, by rescuing me. And I have done your bidding all these years and done it gladly because I was so grateful to you. But now I'm going to tell you what's what. Like how you should, like, you did this thing for me. You need to do it again, for your fellow humans, kind of a thing. And it just, the way, like, I think like the professor, the guy who played Prospero, like had his hands on Ariel's shoulders, kind of thing. And it was just kind of a close bonding type of a moment. And then you saw him go into the last kind of line, because they cut out some stuff in that play. So it kind of went from that right into his final scene where he was basically saying, I've taught you everything I know. It's time for me to let you go and free you from my tutelage, kind of a thing. And you have taught me so much as well. So I think that in that respect, it was just those two little moments that really solidified that for in that performance anyway. So
it's really, really lovely to think about Prospero and Ariel as freeing each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, that's really beautiful. That's really, really beautiful.
Yeah, that was really like, whenever I hear people saying like what a tyrant Prospero is, and that he's just like the the invader and that kind of thing, and he enslaves everyone, which there's something to be said for that interpretation, obviously. But because of that performance that I saw, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more, to that. There's so much more depth that, yes, he was the controlling source at one point, but he had done everything he could. And to your point, Jason, he was humbled by the fact that I didn't know everything. I couldn't do it all. My characters, the people that I formed are now taking on a life of their own, and taking what I taught them or taking what I did for them and running with it and becoming maybe more human than I am myself. So yeah,
which makes his line about when he returns, that every third thought will be of his grave, makes it somehow more poignant, I suppose, thinking about how Ariel and Miranda, and even to some extent Caliban, again, right, these figures that he has shaped in some way, how he has kind of let them go, and they're moving on while he's winding down. And I do love the Tempest.
I mean, I almost want to say that the reason it was so easy for Ariel to convince Prospero is maybe a part of his subconscious was already ready to do that. I mean, because because I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about the crew that were just put to sleep basically in the ship. And everyone else thought that they were basically dead, but they weren't.
Yeah.
And the fact that Prospero seems to want to show compassion to those people who don't really mean anything to him, suggests that at the beginning of the play he's already ready to say, okay, well, these people didn't do anything wrong, so I'll just put them to sleep. They get off easy, and then I'll do my thing with the people who I don't like. But it's a little bit reminds me of something that I said about Iago last week, but it's a little bit like Ariel was exploiting something that was already subconsciously working in Prospero's mind. Because again, just like the hiding of the sailors suggests it, and even his, well, I don't know, it's like, okay, no, anyway, so that was just thought.
It might even have something to do, Lukash, with the fact that Prospero has promised to free Ariel, right? I mean, so maybe, if we're going to attribute something like that to Ariel, seeing something like that in Prospero, it might literally just be that, right? It might be this promise, right? That you've bid me do this, that, and the other thing, but you've told me that I can go. And you just blew up at me a little bit ago and got all pissed and, made me think this was never going to happen now. But you've assured me that it still will. And, I'm really struck by the fact that the longer the play goes on, the more gentle toward Ariel Prospero seems to be. Mm-hmm. And, that would be something to think about on a reread, right? Like looking for the little details. So one thing that struck me that I wanted to ask you guys about, because I didn't watch my old videos, so I don't know if this has ever struck me before, but I noticed it this time, and I can't make out what Shakespeare is doing with this. And so I just wanted to get you guys' I don't know, and maybe this is something that we chew on for the next year, right? Maybe we reread the Tempest next year. But at the very end of Act 3, okay, Alonso has, what is this, like, I don't know, 8 lines or something like this. And, and he says, "Oh, it is monstrous, monstrous. Methought the billows spoke and told me of it. The winds did sing it to me. And the thunder, that deep and dreadful organ pipe, pronounced the name of Prosper. It did base my trespass. Therefore my son, Ilius, is bedded, and I'll seek him deeper than ever plummet sounded, and with him there lie mudded." And that line, the second from last line in that little speech there, is almost identical to the end of my favorite speech in the Tempest, which is in 5-1 by Prospero, and his final lines there are, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book. So we have, I'll seek him deeper than ever plummet sounded, and bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound. And I just find it just seems odd that Shakespeare uses identical words in the mouths of these two rulers, right? So Alonso is the king of Naples, and Prospero is the Duke of Milan, or Milan, or I've heard it pronounced 3 different ways. And I guess I just don't know what he's doing there. Do you guys have any sense of that? Did you notice those lines?
I didn't, but I'm trying to think like what he would have meant by that. And Alonso, I get Alonso and the other guy, Antonio, confused. Alonso is Ferdinand's father, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure before I went on with this. I feel like he might be, because Alonso is under the impression that Ferdinand is dead the whole time. So I feel like, and this was another point I was going to make about the progression of Prospero to forgiveness, that Alonso is like so distressed by the fact that his son is dead that the seeking him forever is like trying to find his child, even though it's hopeless. And then maybe Prospero throwing his book into the sea is saying, this thing that I thought I needed all this time, I don't need it anymore, because my child and my life here is I already have it. Whereas Alonso thought he lost his child and all his hope.
Well, he thought he lost his child by Prospero's magic, by Prospero's doing.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe this idea that Prospero uses the same language to essentially commit to an undoing of that magic, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like maybe like a, I don't know, yeah, like because the words are out of order as well, right? So it's almost like it's kind of unstitching a spell or something like this.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm intrigued. Yeah, I don't know how I didn't. I don't remember ever noticing that before. Especially because, again, Prospero's speech is my favorite speech in all of Shakespeare. That speech, and yeah, it's weird that I never noticed the use of the exact same words. Just I don't know, what, 14 pages earlier in this edition. So
yeah. What were you, Josh?
I hadn't noticed that either. That's really interesting. I also wonder whether the word mudded at the end of Alonso's lines is maybe sort of wordplay with muddied, like, muddy the waters, confuse people. But anyway, it's not all that relevant to the conversation. I just like wordplay.
No, it could be. I mean, that's one of the things, right? Shakespeare was the king of wordplay. I mean, it's funny reading it this time. I would occasionally come to a line, and then I would look at a footnote, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting that the editors think that that's what that means right there, because that's not what I think that means right there." God, I feel like it happened. I feel like it happened right near the end, but I'm looking at the footnotes, so I can't tell. But yeah, I mean, I think that with much of Shakespeare, right, there are lines that mean 3 different things at once, and that's kind of part of the genius of the whole thing, And I think that we all kind of labor under the misapprehension that Shakespeare, this stuff just like sprang out of him fully formed. But we have that, like, I don't remember what it is. It's part of a play that was never finished. It was worked on by multiple authors. And we know that Shakespeare was one of them because we see the annotations and some of the writing in his handwriting. And it shows scribbling out and various other things. So we know that he did some of that. But I think the temptation is that that we just think that he was just. I mean, I don't know, that he was like Lukács was saying, right? When he's talking about Acts of the Apostles, that he was a god, right? When you were talking about Lukács, it reminded me of Groundhog Day. I don't know if either of you have seen Groundhog Day, but I love that scene in the cafe where he's like, "I am an immortal," and Andy McDowell says, "You're God," and he says, "I'm a god. I'm not the god." And but yeah, I think oftentimes we think of Shakespeare as kind of a god, right? Not the god, but a god. And when in fact, I mean, he was just, on some level, he was a jobbing playwright, an actor, and I don't know. I mean, the fact though that he was able to come up with so many plays that are so freaking good, and here we are, 400 and some odd years later. And we're still, I mean, he could never have imagined this, Right. Oh, there's these little tablets and there's people's pictures on them and they're all over the world and they're talking and it's in real time. And he never would have been able to fathom something like this. And here we are talking about it.
And what I like, one of my favorite pieces in the Marjorie Garber book is like the opening paragraph where she says that Shakespeare's timelessness could be better referred to as an uncanny timeliness. And I think that's really cool too, that like different generations have interpreted different plays differently. Like, like you get to the late 20th century and you're in the sort of post-colonial world. And so you get these colonialist readings of the Tempest, which could only happen in the second half of the 20th century. Right. But Shakespeare obviously would have known about colonialism, but he couldn't have known that, Aimé Césaire would write this new play based on the Tempest that takes place in the Caribbean. But anyway, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it's like, we know so little about him that it's like, it's funny because like another thing that was pointed out to me is that actually the amount that we know about Shakespeare's life is about normal given the period he was living in. Like in terms of the other literary figures of the period, we don't know that much less about him than we know about anyone else. So
that's cool.
The thing, so whenever people are like, oh, we know so little about him, it's like really what they're saying is that he's a writer of such stature that we wish we knew more than we know about, Christopher Marlowe or Ben Jonson or these other writers from the time, or than like, Sophocles, who we know like nothing about, or Homer, who probably wasn't even a real person.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me that Shakespeare, and I don't know that he was doing this necessarily, or he would have even conceived of something like this. But, Kelly and I were talking yesterday about how I read in the news that Jennifer Lawrence is pregnant, right? And I didn't even know Jennifer Lawrence was married. And I read the name of her husband, and I have no idea who he is or what he does, et cetera, et cetera. And it just communicated to me that Jennifer Lawrence has done a really good job of keeping the kind of public eye out of her private life. And so maybe on some level, Shakespeare was doing that for his time. I mean, maybe on some level, he saw that he didn't want people's kind of nose in his business. And so he was just kind of doing his best to kind of keep his private life and his public life separate.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. Well, and then too, when you think about it, and it probably wasn't really the same thing here or in that time period, but you always know more about the actors on the stage or the characters and the actors in the movies than you necessarily do about the guy who wrote it. So, it could have been that kind of thing too, where he was just writing plays and he was spending hours in his house poring over these scripts and, figuring out how he was going to do the thing. And he maybe was more on the business end of things. Well, I mean, we do know that he did do some acting as well, but maybe, he was just more on the in the backstage. And then in that time frame, maybe it's like today, we know way more about who Jennifer Lawrence is than the guy that she's married to, if he's also not an actor, you know.
Or like how when you look into when you talk to like cinephiles, they'll be able to name director after director or actor after actor, but they don't always know, oh yeah, this screenwriter who wrote all these screenplays that were all so amazing. I mean, sometimes you do, obviously, sometimes you do, but not as frequent, but not as many screenwriters as directors, right? I mean, even in your case, Jason, I think you probably know of more direct, you know, and like we talk about great directors, you know, like Hitchcock, for example. I don't know that Hitchcock wrote very many of the screenplays that he directed. But we know Hitchcock. Everyone knows Hitchcock's names, and most people who aren't diehard cinephiles don't know the names of any of the people who wrote the screenplays for the movies that he directed. You know what I mean? So maybe it was the thing where at the time of Shakespeare, everyone was losing their minds over the actors and the theater directors or the owner of the theater or whoever ran the theater, whatever they were called, less than the person who wrote the thing, because. You know, I think plays at the time in Shakespeare's England occupied a similar place as movies do now, in a way where like people didn't view them as like high art; they were just entertainment. You know what I mean? And so a person who wrote the plays might not be thought of like that highly. You know.
Well, and it could also, frankly, be, you know, I mean, there could be quite a good deal of truth to the idea that you know, they didn't know what they had. Maybe they didn't know what they had. Maybe like, oh man, this was really entertaining. Did you go see that Hamlet last week? Oh yeah, that was bloody, man. I love that. You know, it could very well be that on some level, the people who are in charge of kind of what is remembered, right? The people who find themselves in a position of how do we tell the story of the last 20 years, maybe weren't necessarily sure what they had. It seems like the people who compiled, his friends who compiled the plays after he had died, had a sense of what was there and what it meant. But maybe the culture as a whole didn't necessarily, you know, and we've only kind of discovered it over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do we have anything else to talk about? I mean,
I think there's tons more to talk about, but I think I'm good.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I think we could all talk about Shakespeare for hours on end, but
no specific points we need to talk about for this one today.
So, Rainey, what are we going to be reading next week?
Oh, what are we going to? Henry IV, Part 1. Yes. And whose channel is that going to be on? Who did we decide?
That'll be my channel.
Lucas's channel, yeah.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks will be last two discussions will both be on my channel. Yeah.
As the creator of Shaketember, it is only appropriate.
Yes. I'm only one of two creators, but the other creator fell off the side of the world.
Yes. It'd be cool if you were still watching, though.
Yeah, it would be funny if he like stumbled across this.
All right. So so we will see you on Lukash's channel next week, next Saturday, and for Henry IV Part 1. All right. Okay. See you, everybody. Thank you.
Adios.